what if the concept of the second Adam, which, for like 2 millennia has been treated mostly as just a theological metaphor or this poetic spiritual idea, what if it was actually a literal genetically engineered embryo?
Yeah.
Like a highly specific biological template that was deliberately designed to save humanity from the accumulated corruption of its own DNA.
It is a premise that fundamentally forces you to just completely re-examine the boundaries between ancient scripture, evolutionary biology, and modern genetics.
Right.
It takes the abstract and makes it violently, intricately physical.
I want to set up an analogy first to help us kind of wrap our heads around the scale of what we're talking about today.
Okay, go for it.
Usually when we talk about restoring something ancient and incredibly valuable, let's imagine a lost Renaissance masterpiece that someone discovers buried in a damp, forgotten cellar.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Right. There's this expectation of a very linear physical process of repair. You bring the painting into a sterile lab environment. You use highly precise chemical solvents to strip away the centuries of grime, the smoke damage, the mold.
Preserve it.
Exactly. You might meticulously touch up the flaking paint with a microbrush, but the entire goal of that process is to bring the physical canvas back to the exact moment it left the artist's easel.
Right. And in that traditional restoration scenario, it is a process of preservation. You're trying to freeze the artifact in time to save the existing physical object from further decay without, fundamentally altering what it is.
Right. The original material stays intact.
The material remains intact.
But imagine you encounter a situation where the canvas itself is just fundamentally rotting from the inside out.
Yeah.
The very fibers of the material, the molecular structure of the linen and the wood, are corrupted at a structural level. You can't just clean it.
No.
You can't just apply a fresh coat of varnish or like paint over the cracks. The decay is woven into the artifact itself.
It's systemic.
It's systemic. So to actually save the masterpiece, you would have to somehow extract the total sum of the artist's original intent. Every single brushstroke, every complex color profile, the exact geometry of the image, and you'd have to write all of that information onto a completely new, indestructible canvas.
Which completely shifts the operation from mere repair to absolute transformation.
Yes.
You're dealing with the definition of taking something deeply historical, something old and corrupted, and making it fundamentally new, all while retaining its exact historical identity and essence.
Right.
I mean, the information is saved, but the substrate is replaced.
And that profound tension between trying to repair a corrupted vessel and realizing you have to completely re-engineer it from the ground up to save the information inside it, that is exactly the territory we're plunging into today.
It really is.
So welcome to the Deep Dive. We are absolutely thrilled to have you with us because today we're embarking on a journey that is going to take your standard assumptions about ancient history, biology, and theology and just entirely upend them.
It's going to be a lot.
We are unpacking a massive, incredibly provocative theological and scientific synthesis by an author named Zachary David Enfield.
It is a massive architectural model. We're looking primarily at two intertwined manuscripts that were provided in our sources, the Living Codex and the Prepared Germline.
Right.
And what Enfield has done here is deliberately collide fields of study that are almost always kept in entirely separate, fiercely guarded academic silos.
Yeah, they do not mix usually.
Never. We're talking about deep-time evolutionary genetics, the brutal biological mechanics of founder populations, the concepts behind modern artificial intelligence, and rigorous biblical theology, all in one place.
Before we go one step further, we do need to establish the ground rules for you listening. Our overarching mission today is to explore the author's architecture.
Right.
We're not here to declare this synthesis as absolute scientific dogma or religious fact. We aren't taking sides on politically or culturally charged debates about evolution or religion. Our role is strictly to be your guides through the intricate mechanics of this idea. We want to show you the mathematical formulas, the biological mechanisms, and the philosophical logic the text proposes, just so you can see exactly how this theoretical structure is built.
We're basically going to examine the blueprints of the model. And those blueprints require us to view the biblical narrative not as a rejection of biological science, but as a deeply encoded biological history.
It's going to be a wild ride.
For sure.
We're going to move from the deep-time ancestral roots of humanity through the highly controversial genetics of inbreeding and population bottlenecks. We'll explore how ancient agricultural practices map perfectly onto modern genetic introgression.
And the pop culture stuff.
Oh yeah, we'll look at pop culture analogies involving Superman and the Predator to understand gene editing, and we'll even discuss the specific biological eye color proposed for the incarnation. So, okay, let's unpack this.
To build this structure, we have to start at the absolute foundation, and that requires us to completely reevaluate the name Adam. Because if you're going to understand how a second Adam biologically fixes the human genetic line, you first have to understand how the first Adam established it in this model.
Right, and crucially, how that ancestral line accumulated its biological burden over time.
Exactly.
Because in standard cultural conversations, we often see two extremes.
Right.
On one side, Adam is treated as this frozen, anatomically modern Homo sapiens phenotype who just miraculously appeared out of thin air exactly 6,000 years ago.
Which the author explicitly rejects. He rejects the idea that you can just compress the entire geological, fossil, and astronomical record into a few millennia.
But importantly, the model also rejects the opposite, the secular assumption that you must throw away the biblical genealogies entirely just because we know the Earth is ancient.
Right, he doesn't do that either.
Enfield attempts a highly technical synthesis. The text proposes what it calls a deep-time Adamic founder line architecture.
So in this framework, Adam is not just one guy wandering around a garden a few thousand years ago.
No.
Adam represents a deep-time ancestral root.
Right.
The model treats Adam as the long human lineage body progressing through successive evolutionary stages. This encompasses the entire journey from early primate forms through hominoids and hominins, all the way to anatomically modern humans.
It's a huge scale.
But what makes this source material so fascinating is that it doesn't just wave its hands and say, Adam means evolution.
Right.
It actually attempts to map the Genesis genealogies onto the geological timeline using nested astronomical cycles.
The math in the sources blew my mind, honestly.
That's intense.
It is staggering, and I want to spend some real time breaking this down for you, because it's not just arbitrary guesswork where the author is pulling huge numbers out of a hat.
Yeah.
The text uses astronomical periods to create a transformed chronological grid.
Right.
Specifically, it looks at the Saros cycle of lunar eclipses, the Metonic cycle, and the Milankovitch orbital cycles.
Let's focus on the deepest calculation the author provides because it kind of sets the scale for the whole model.
Okay.
The formula takes a number 405,000 and divides it by 16.
Okay, wait, let's stop right there. I need you to explain these numbers. What is the 405,000, and why on earth are we dividing it by 16?
Right, so the 405,000 refers to the long eccentricity cycle of Earth's orbit, which is one of those Milankovitch cycles.
Okay.
Earth doesn't orbit the sun in a perfect, unchanging circle. Over immense periods of time, the gravitational pull of other planets, primarily Jupiter and Venus, slowly stretches Earth's orbit from a nearly perfect circle into a slight ellipse and then back again.
So it's like a cosmic rubber band slowly stretching and relaxing.
That's a great way to picture it. And this stretching process takes exactly 405,000 years to complete one full cycle.
Wow.
Yeah, and geologists and paleoclimatologists actually use this cycle as a highly reliable metronome to date ancient rock layers.
Really?
Yeah, because the changing shape of the orbit dramatically affects Earth's climate, which in turn affects how sediments are deposited over millions of years.
Okay, so 405,000 is our deep-time planetary metronome. But where does the 16 come from?
The 16 is derived from the complex relationship between two different ways of measuring a lunar month.
Oh.
The synodic month and the anomalistic month.
Break those down for me, because I think most people just assume a month is a month.
Yeah, a synodic month is the one we're all familiar with. It's the time it takes the moon to cycle through its phases from one new moon to the next new moon.
Right.
That takes about 29.53 days. It's based on the alignment of the Earth, the moon, and the sun. However, the moon's orbit around the Earth is also elliptical. It's not a perfect circle.
Right. Sometimes the moon looks huge in the sky, like a supermoon, because it's physically closer to us.
Exactly. The point where the moon is closest to Earth is called perigee. An anomalistic month is the time it takes the moon to travel from one perigee to the next perigee.
Okay.
And because the moon's elliptical orbit is constantly shifting in space, an anomalistic month is slightly shorter than a synodic month. It's about 27.55 days.
So the moon's phase cycle and the moon's distance cycle are basically out of sync.
They are out of sync by about 2 days per month. The author's math calculates the accumulating gap between these two lunar cycles over time.
Ah, I see.
The text proposes that the mathematical resonance between the Earth's long, 405,000-year orbital metronome and the accumulating drift between the lunar months produces a division factor of 16.
So we take the 405,000-year cycle divided by 16, and the math gives us 25,312.5 years.
Right.
And the model proposes this specific number as the literal value of one transformed Shana, or biblical year, in the deepest ancestral epoch.
Yes. So when the book of Genesis states that Adam lived 930 years, the author doesn't read that as 900 solar orbits.
Right.
The model multiplies 930 by 25,312.5.
Let me do that math. That gives you roughly 23.5 million years for one Adamic lifetime.
And the text proposes a two-body placement for this timeline, Adam's beginning to his death, and then a mirrored timeline from his death to our present.
Okay.
When you combine those, it opens the Adamic history around 47 million years ago.
Which places the dawn of Adam right in the middle of the Eocene epoch.
Exactly.
For those familiar with evolutionary history, the Eocene is the era of early primate diversification. It is a totally different way of reading the text.
Completely.
It treats the biblical timeline not as a 6,000-year straight line, but as a compressed, highly engineered, chronological map of hominin evolution.
Right. So as you move down the Genesis 5 genealogy from Adam to Seth, Enosh, Kenan, and so on, the model doesn't view them as single human individuals shaking hands and passing a baton.
No.
They function as evolutionary begetting horizons.
Getting horizons. Okay, so when the text says Adam begat Seth, it's not a birth certificate for one baby.
No, it is the dawn of a new biological configuration.
Wow.
They are singular founders whose specific genetic mutations become recurrent, branching out to form entire population bodies across geological epochs like the Oligocene and Miocene.
That is wild.
For example, the text calculates a flood marker in the timeline that places a major basin reset event around 5.16 million years ago.
And I actually checked this against the geological record. That 5.16 million year date aligns within roughly 3% of the conventional scientific dating for the Zanclean megaflood,
Right.
which is the catastrophic event where the Atlantic Ocean breached the Strait of Gibraltar and violently refilled the entire Mediterranean basin.
The alignment is incredibly precise.
Yeah.
But establishing this deep timeline brings us to a massive, incredibly thorny biological issue that the author has to tackle head on.
Oh, absolutely.
If you have a founder population, whether it's an original early primate family in deep time or a bottleneck survivor group of early hominins, they don't have billions of unrelated mates to choose from.
Yeah.
Early reproduction must happen among relatives.
Right. If they're the only ones there or if they're isolated by geography, there's literally no other option.
That is the strict founder population premise. If humanity or any distinct lineage begins with a small founder group, the earliest reproductive unions necessarily occur within that isolated group. The conditional logic is absolute. If no independent population of unrelated partners exists, related reproduction is the only biological route by which the founder family can expand into a population.
Okay, I have to push back here on behalf of anyone listening who knows basic biology.
Sure.
Isn't close-kin reproduction universally biologically disastrous? We know about inbreeding depression. It causes horrific diseases. It lowers fertility. It creates massive developmental issues. To use an analogy, it's like repeatedly photocopying a document. The first copy looks fine, but if you make a copy of a copy, eventually you just magnify the smudges until the text is completely unreadable.
Right.
How can the human race be founded on a mechanism that destroys DNA?
That is exactly the friction point the author anticipates, and it's vital we explore it. The text explicitly states that inbreeding is frequently misunderstood in the cultural imagination. It's either viewed as a magical purifier by ancient royal families, or as an absolute engine of degeneration by modern observers. Genetically speaking, what related reproduction actually does is increase homozygosity.
Let's define homozygosity because that's the mechanical heart of this issue.
Yes.
Let me try an analogy. Imagine you have two massive decks of playing cards. Each deck represents the genes from one parent. Most of the cards are normal, but scattered inside each deck are a few jokers representing harmful hidden genetic mutations.
A very accurate way to visualize genetic load.
Right, so if you marry someone completely unrelated to you, you're shuffling two entirely different decks of cards. Their jokers are probably in completely different places than your joker.
Exactly.
So when you have a kid, they inherit a joker from you, they probably inherit a normal card from the other parent, and the normal card masks the joker. The kid is healthy.
That is heterozygosity. The healthy dominant allele masks the harmful recessive allele. The human genome is vast, and every single one of us listening to this right now carries hidden recessive genetic variants that would cause disease if they were expressed.
But if you reproduce with a close relative, well, you're shuffling 2 decks of cards that have the jokers in the exact same places.
Precisely. Because you both inherited your deck from the same recent common ancestor. So suddenly, when the cards combine in the offspring, Joker meets Joker. 2 identical hidden variants meet up. That is homozygosity. The text describes this process as a disclosure chamber.
A disclosure chamber.
Right. Inbreeding doesn't necessarily create new harmful mutations out of thin air. It forces the invisible genetic realities out into the visible physical body. It exposes what is already there.
So it exposes both the incredible genetic treasures, the highly selected desirable traits that might have been hiding, and the hidden harmful corruption.
Yes.
But the physical body of the offspring pays the price for disclosing that genetic information.
Exactly. Natural inbreeding causes inbreeding depression because nature is a blind, unguided process. Joker meets Joker, the organism becomes ill, fails to reproduce, or dies, and the surviving line continues.
Right.
The author makes a crucial distinction here to answer your photocopy analogy. The text argues that inbreeding exposes, but it does not by itself purify.
Okay.
The biological mechanism establishes the line and reveals its contents, but if left entirely to blind nature, the genetic load will eventually crush the population.
So if nature only exposes the rot but can't fix it without immense suffering and death, the author is backed into a corner here.
Right.
How does this bloodline actually get purified without wiping itself out? The text looks for the answer in an incredibly unlikely place. Not in the modern genetics lab, but in a very ancient, very strange biblical pasture. Let's talk about Jacob's flock.
This is where the biological foundation of the second Adam template really begins to take structural shape. If we follow this logic, the text points us to Genesis chapter 30. Jacob is working for his father-in-law, Laban, and they agree on his wages. Jacob gets to keep all the speckled, spotted, and dark animals from the flock, while Laban keeps the solid-colored ones.
Right, but Laban, being a trickster, immediately tries to cheat Jacob.
Of course.
He removes all the currently marked animals and gives them to his sons, leaving Jacob with a supposedly pure, solid-colored flock that shouldn't be able to produce spotted offspring.
But Jacob somehow manages to breed the remaining solid-colored flock so that they produce speckled, spotted, and streaked offspring anyway.
Which is wild.
He separates them, he breeds the carriers, he favors the strong stock, and he retains them to build his own massive treasured wealth. For thousands of years, people read this as just a miracle, or Jacob using superstitious ancient magic with peeled branches.
But the author reads this narrative as a highly technical, visible court-of-line establishment.
Yes.
It's an ancient, documented demonstration of what we now call functional introgression, backcrossing, and fixation in modern agricultural genetics.
Let's really dig into those terms, because understanding this agricultural metaphor is the only way to understand how the second Adam's biology is supposedly constructed later in the text.
Right.
Introgression and backcrossing.
Let me give an analogy first.
Go ahead.
Imagine you have a beautiful, classic vintage car. Let's say a 1965 Mustang. It looks amazing, the chassis is perfect, but the engine is old, inefficient, and breaks down constantly.
Okay.
You want the reliability of a modern 2026 engine, so you don't want to just go buy a new car. You want this car.
Right?
So you don't throw the chassis away. You pull the modern engine out of a new car and carefully mount it inside the classic body. You're trying to upgrade the capability without losing the identity of the original vessel.
That analogy maps perfectly onto the concept of introgression.
Oh, awesome.
Let's look at how botanists do this with wild tomatoes, which is a classic genetic example. Let's say you have a Maine high-yield commercial tomato line. It produces huge, beautiful fruit, but it is highly susceptible to a specific fungus that is wiping out crops.
The classic car with the bad engine.
Exactly. Now, there is a tiny, bitter, wild relative of the tomato like Solanum pimpinellifolium that naturally has a genetic resistance to this fungus.
Okay.
But you don't want to sell tiny, bitter tomatoes. So you cross your main commercial line with the wild donor line. This produces an F1 hybrid.
And this F1 hybrid is 50% commercial tomato and 50% wild tomato.
Right.
It has the fungus resistance, but it also probably inherited the tiny size and the bitter taste. It's a mixture of the good and the bad.
Right. You want the disease resistance, but you don't want all the other wild baggage. You want to keep the classic chassis.
Yeah.
So you engage in the process of backcrossing. You take that F1 hybrid and cross it back with your main high-yield commercial line, which we call the recurrent parent.
So the next generation is now 75% your main line and only 25% wild.
But here is the crucial step. You carefully select only the specific offspring from that 75% batch that successfully retain the specific disease resistance gene. You discard the ones that lost it, then you take the successful ones, and you backcross them again to the main line. Now they're 87.5% the main line.
Right.
You test them again, select the resistant ones, and cross them again, 93.75%. You keep doing this until the plant is functionally 99.9% your original, beautiful commercial tomato, but it has completely integrated the wild resistance gene.
Swallowed it.
Swallowed it. That is the exact word the author uses for this covenantal genetic operation. The target line swallows the selected trait, retaining it while stripping away all the unwanted donor DNA. Once the desired trait is stabilized so it reliably passes to every single descendant without fail, that is called fixation.
And mapping this back to Jacob, Jacob was functionally identifying hidden recessive traits, the spotting and speckling that were hiding in the genomes of the solid-colored sheep. He used selective recurrence to expose those traits, backcross the carriers to strengthen the line, and fix the trait to create a distinct, wealthy flock. He didn't just let the sheep breed randomly in the wild, he acted as an intelligent selector.
And the text connects this agricultural reality directly to the Levitical sacrificial law, which elevates this from farming to theology.
Right.
When an ancient Israelite offers a sacrifice, they aren't supposed to wander into the wilderness and grab a sick, dying, random animal. The offering cannot be refused.
No, it has to be unblemished. It has to cost you something.
It has to come from the treasure. The biological line of the flock is separated from the wild, it is repeatedly crossed, it is strengthened, and it is treasured. The worshiper gives what they have carefully cultivated and purified.
Wow.
The text argues that this entire architectural logic, from the deep time founder population to the painful exposure of genetic load through inbreeding to the intelligent selection and preservation of the line via backcrossing, exists for one singular purpose. It exists so that the ultimate representative, the ultimate unblemished lamb, can eventually be sourced from the human lineage and offered.
Okay, I track with the logic. We've seen how human breeders can intelligently select traits in sheep, and how botanists can isolate genes in wild tomatoes. But humans cannot exactly run a multi-millennial selective breeding program on themselves.
Right, obviously.
The time frame is impossible, the ethical and moral implications are horrific, and as we discussed earlier, close-kin human reproduction causes terrible suffering.
Exactly.
Which brings us to the absolute core of today's deep dive. If humans can't intelligently breed themselves to genetic perfection, how is the biological template of the second Adam actually prepared?
And here, the text points to a very specific phrase in the book of Hebrews, chapter 10. A body you prepared for me. Traditionally, commentators read that as a poetic way of saying, God gave Jesus a physical body to live in. But the author of our source text takes this phrase incredibly literally. The sources propose that the incarnation of Christ was not just a spiritual overshadowing, but a direct biological engineering event.
A biological engineering event.
The phrase the author uses to describe it is IVF without a needle or petri dish.
That is a massive, highly controversial claim.
Oh, absolutely.
We have to unpack the exact mechanics the author is proposing here, because this is where the model departs completely from both standard scientific assumptions and standard religious assumptions.
Yeah.
The text makes a very sharp technical distinction using two Latin words, ficere and invenire.
Yes, understanding this Latin distinction is the master key to understanding the author's rejection of how people usually assume the incarnation worked. Ficere means to make, to produce, to manufacture, or to author. Invenire means to find, to encounter, or to receive. In this model, God alone occupies the ficere office. God is the one who manufactures. He directly, genetically prepares the complete, viable human embryo.
Meaning, God doesn't just tweak Mary's existing DNA. He builds the entire genomic architecture from scratch, using the historical blueprint of the lineage.
Correct. And Mary and Joseph occupy the in veneer office.
They receive.
They receive what has been made. Mary receives the embryo inwardly. She provides the necessary gestation, the uterine environment, the oxygen, the nutrition, the physical maternal embodiment, and ultimately the birth.
Right.
Joseph receives the child outwardly. He provides the naming, the protection, the integration into the historical Davidic royal house, and the legal cultural custody in first-century Judea.
What I find so fascinating here is that this framework completely bypasses the idea of a divine-human hybrid. Because if you think about it purely biologically, the standard assumption creates a math problem. If God is pure spirit, and Mary is a human woman, providing a standard haploid ovum, an egg with 23 chromosomes, how does a male child form?
Exactly.
Does God just magically materialize a Y chromosome to pair with Mary's egg? Is the child 50% Mary's DNA and 50% divine magic?
The author refers to that as the Hercules problem, the idea of a demigod who is half divine and half human. The text explicitly rejects that hybrid model. God doesn't mate with Mary in a biological sense. He prepares a 100% human embryo.
And the text points out that if God just used Mary's standard egg and miraculously supplied a male sperm equivalent, the resulting child would just be a standard random genetic recombination of Mary's immediate local ancestors.
Yes.
He would have whatever genetic load, whatever recessive flaws happened to be in Mary's local family tree.
But the stated goal of the second Adam is to recapitulate the entire Adamic and Davidic bloodline, to gather the whole deep-time history of the human root into one perfect seed.
So God acts as the ultimate intelligent selector, just like we talked about with Jacob's flock.
Exactly.
Instead of relying on the clumsy, random shuffling of natural human reproduction, which would just pass on the accumulated genetic corruption, God reaches back through the entire genomic field of humanity, from the deep-time Eocene Adamic root, through Noah, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, all the way to David.
Because God is omniscient, he has complete knowledge of every single genetic variant that has ever existed in the historical line.
He selects the exact desired variants from the vast historical treasury of the human genome.
Yes.
He carefully excludes the deleterious germline burdens, the accumulated genetic corruption, those jokers in the deck, the smudges on the photocopy we mentioned earlier. He arranges a perfect, unblemished human sequence.
But the text notes that just assembling a perfect sequence of DNA letters A, C, G, and T isn't enough to make a living human embryo. He also has to restore perfect maternal and paternal imprinting.
Let's pause on genomic imprinting because the text makes a huge deal out of this to explain why just spontaneously generating an embryo inside a woman is biologically impossible without divine architecture. What exactly is genomic imprinting?
Genomic imprinting is a fascinating, highly complex biological phenomenon where certain genes are expressed in a specific parent of origin manner.
Okay.
Meaning, for some specific genes, you absolutely need the version inherited from the mother to be turned on and the father's version to be turned off, or vice versa. The physical DNA sequence of the gene might be completely identical, but there are epigenetic marks, tiny chemical tags called methyl groups that sit on top of the DNA and tell the embryo how to read it.
So it's like having the correct hardware, but needing two different software passwords to get the machine to boot up. One password has to come from the mom, one from the dad.
That's a brilliant way to phrase it. For instance, the epigenetic tags that come from the paternal sperm are heavily involved in signaling the development of the placenta, which the embryo needs to survive in the womb. The epigenetic tags from the maternal egg are heavily involved in the development of the embryo itself.
So if a human egg somehow just magically doubled its own DNA to create an embryo, which is called parthenogenesis, it would fail.
It would completely fail in mammals. If you have two sets of maternal genes with only maternal epigenetic tags, the embryo cannot form a proper placenta and will quickly die.
Yeah.
You need the paternal developmental grammar. It's not just about having the letters of the DNA, it's about the regulatory grammar governing those letters.
Which is why the author argues that the divine preparation in the Fisair office supplies not just the sequence of genes, but the entire human zygotic and developmental architecture.
Exactly.
The maternal type and paternal type, epigenetic marks, the sex chromosome determination, the mitochondrial DNA, the regulatory RNA. All of it is perfectly artificially arranged by the maker, gathering the vast distributed treasure of the human lineage into one fully viable founding embryo.
It systematically overcomes the inherited biological corruption of the first Adam. It is a stunning conceptual model of how to achieve biological incorruptibility while remaining entirely within the definition of a human organism.
Now, to help the listener actually visualize this incredibly dense genetic concept, the author steps away from the Latin and the epigenetics and uses a couple of really striking pop culture analogies.
I love this part.
And honestly, this is where the source text gets incredibly fun to read. Let's talk about Superman.
Yes, the author references the lore of the 2013 film Man of Steel. In that movie's depiction of Krypton, the civilization stores the entire genetic potential, the deep-time bloodlines of their entire species, in an ancient physical artifact called the Codex. When they want to produce new citizens, they don't reproduce naturally. They use a genesis chamber to artificially engineer bodies tailored for specific societal roles, drawing from the vast genetic information stored in the Codex.
And when the planet Krypton is facing total destruction, Superman's father, Jor-El, steals the Codex artifact. He literally infuses it into the cells of his infant son, Kal-El.
Right.
He embodies the entire genetic history and future potential of a dead world into one singular living organism. And the author points to this and says, this is exactly what happens with the second Adam. He is the living codex of humanity.
The analogy clarifies a massive theological point in the text. When ancient scriptures talk about the Book of Life, we usually imagine a static, literal registry of names in heaven.
Yeah, like a big ledger.
Exactly. But the author argues it is a living biological identity. The entire ancestral archive of humanity's promise, the total sum of its uncorrupted potential, is written into the sun. The archive outside the sun is merely preserved information. The archive written into the sun becomes generative identity.
Wow.
He carries the blueprint for a renewed humanity inside his very physical, biological preparation.
It's an amazing image. The ultimate backup drive for the human race stored in one body. But the author also brings up a second, completely different movie analogy, The Predator, which I definitely did not expect to find in a dense theological and scientific treatise.
No, it's quite a tonal shift from Superman to an R-rated sci-fi horror film.
Yeah, but
the author uses it to address a crucial biological distinction, the difference between somatic changes and germline changes. In the 2018 film, The Predator, it is revealed that the alien creatures don't just hunt humans for sport. They assimilate the useful genetic traits of the species they conquer, like human spinal fluid, into their own reproductive program.
Right.
They want to upgrade their species' future, not just their current bodies.
Right, because there's a monumental difference between fixing a biological problem in one individual body and fixing it for all of their future descendants.
Exactly. That is the fundamental difference between somatic and germline. A somatic change happens in your ordinary body cells. If you get a cut and your skin heals, or if you build massive muscles by going to the gym every day, those are somatic changes.
Right.
Or to use a modern medical example, if we use CRISPR gene editing today to cure sickle cell anemia in a patient's blood cells, which we are actually doing in clinical trials right now, that is a somatic edit. It is an amazing miracle of science, but it dies with the patient.
Because you cannot pass your gym muscles or your somatically edited blood cells down to your children.
No.
If you cure your sickle cell somatically, your children can still inherit the disease from your reproductive cells.
But a germline change is entirely different. A germline change occurs in the reproductive lineage, the sperm, the egg, or the very first founding zygote.
Yeah.
A change made there is copied into every single cell of the resulting adult body, including their own reproductive cells. It becomes permanently hereditary, it cascades down the generations, it becomes the dawn of a new epoch.
So connecting this back to the second Adam, to actually save humanity from its biological corruption, the divine preparation couldn't just be a somatic fix. Jesus couldn't just be a regular guy with a normal corrupted genome who lived a really healthy lifestyle, or who had the divine power to magically heal his own somatic tissue injuries.
No, the preparation had to be a germline preparation. It had to be the establishment of a completely new, incorruptible reproductive template.
Yes. The author summarizes it beautifully. Somatic wisdom can heal the body already present. Germline wisdom prepares the body that can become a line.
The second Adam is designed to be a new root for the human tree.
But this introduces a massive biological hurdle, which the author calls the F1 problem. Let's say you have this perfectly prepared F1 specimen, the first generation of this new incorruptible human lineage. He possesses a perfect, unblemished genetic configuration. He is the living codex.
Right.
How does he actually reproduce and pass that perfect template on to humanity?
Well, if he were to reproduce the normal biological way by mating with an unmatched, unprepared human female from the standard population.
It would be an absolute disaster for the template because of meiosis and recombination.
Explain how that ruins the template.
When human reproductive cells gametes form, the parent's chromosomes undergo a process called recombination. They literally shuffle, cross over, break apart, and swap pieces to create genetic diversity. It's nature's way of constantly mixing the deck.
Right.
So if this perfect F1 specimen creates gametes, his perfectly arranged genome is broken apart and shuffled. And then that shuffled half is combined with the mother's shuffled half, which is full of the old genetic corruption.
You're hitting on the exact friction point. Recombination would instantly dilute and scramble the perfect genetic configuration.
Yeah.
The exceptional F1 body might be perfect in himself, but ordinary sexual reproduction guarantees that his unique, carefully arranged combination of alleles is shattered into a mosaic in his descendants. The complete, perfect F1 arrangement cannot be copied intact through sexual reproduction.
Which raises an incredible question. If he can't reproduce the normal way, without ruining the perfect genetic template, how does this new humanity actually multiply?
That's a great question.
How does he save us if he can't pass his genes to us? Hold that thought, because the text solves this mystery in a truly mind-bending way, and we will get to it in the final section.
But before we answer how this lineage multiplies, the text pauses to explore one more fascinating detail. We've talked extensively about the invisible genome. But did this perfectly prepared, deeply historical body have a visible physical identifier?
Oh, right.
Was there a physical signature of this perfect genomic assembly that people could actually see?
And to answer this, the author looks to the book of Revelation. In chapter 1 and chapter 19, John the Revelator sees a vision of the glorified Christ and describes his eyes as being like a flame of fire.
Yeah.
Now, traditionally, everyone reads that as purely mystical poetry, right?
Yeah.
Glowing, scary angel eyes, the piercing gaze of divine judgment.
Yes, the standard interpretation treats it as an apocalyptic metaphor, completely divorced from physical biology. But the author proposes something radical. What if John was describing a highly specific, composite biological phenotype?
A real physical trait.
A real, genetically determined human eye architecture that physically resembles a burning flame. The condition is called central heterochromia.
I looked up high-resolution medical photographs of this when reading the source text, and it is genuinely stunning to look at. Central heterochromia is a genetic trait where the outer ring of the iris is one distinct color, and the inner ring immediately surrounding the pupil is a completely different, sharply contrasting color.
The author describes the exact genetic combination needed to visually match John's apocalyptic vision. First, you have a light blue, blue-gray, or blue-green outer iris. This acts as the cool, contrasting background.
Right.
Then, tightly concentrated around the dark, black void of the pupil, you have a highly pigmented warm amber gold or copper zone. And crucially, there are radial pigment spokes extending outward from that golden center into the blue background.
Visually, it literally looks like a golden flame burning in the dark center of the pupil, flaring outward into a night sky.
Exactly.
It's an incredible biological feature, and the text grounds this deeply in actual modern genetics.
Eye color is highly polygenic, meaning it isn't controlled by just one simple on-off switch. It involves many genes interacting in complex ways. But a major influence on this specific pattern is the HARC2-OCA2 genomic region on chromosome 15.
Okay.
The author notes that producing this exact stable bilateral pattern where you have low melanin production in the outer stroma, localized high melanin in the central ring, and the specific radial structural pattern requires a very specific coordinated genetic combination.
It perfectly fits the idea of an intelligent selector we discussed earlier. God isn't just throwing darts at a board. He is deliberately assembling a highly specific composite physical marker from the vast, deep-time treasury of human genetic diversity.
Now, we must introduce a crucial clarification here, which the author is extremely adamant about.
Very important.
The text places strict, highly visible guardrails around this idea to prevent it from being weaponized by bad actors. This is absolutely not a racial argument.
Yes, we need to be very clear about this because discussing the genetics of eye color in historical figures can very quickly veer into dangerous territory.
Exactly.
The author explicitly and repeatedly rejects the idea that assigning this phenotype to the second Adam proves that Jesus belonged to a modern European or white racial category.
The text insists on the scientific reality that human genetic diversity is clinal and overlapping.
Let me define clinal for the listener because it's an important concept. Clinal means that genetic traits change gradually across geographical areas over deep time. There are no hard, distinct biological borders between human populations. Traits flow and overlap based on ancient migrations.
Exactly. Identifying a specific variant in the HRE2-OCA2 region does not equal a modern passport, and it does not define a distinct genetic species or race.
Right.
The author's point is actually a direct counter-argument to the common assumption that Jesus must have looked like the statistical average of a contemporary first-century Judean.
Right, because if we follow the model's logic, if God directly prepared the embryo by reaching back through the entire Adamic timeline, he isn't limited by the local immediate gene pool of Nazareth in the year zero.
No.
He had the whole biological palette of humanity, stretching back millions of years, to paint with.
Yeah.
The central heterochromia is proposed as a deliberate, universally sourced divine marker of the prepared body, not as proof of modern racial superiority or specific ethnic purity.
The text phrases it perfectly. The strongest thesis is not Jesus was European. It is. The prepared body cannot be reduced to ordinary maternal phenotype inference, and John may preserve one deliberate physical identifier of that body.
Wow.
It is a signature of the maker on the living codex, a visual indicator that this body contains the treasury of the whole human lineage.
Okay, let's pull all these massive threads together. We have the fully prepared body. It has bypassed the corruption of inbreeding through divine architecture.
Yes.
It contains the entire treasured lineage of the human founder line. It avoids the divine-human hybrid demigod issue. And it bears the physical signature of the maker with the odds of fire. But we are still left with the massive cliffhanger from earlier. How does this singular, isolated biological template actually save the rest of us? How does he solve the F1 problem and multiply the incorruptible lineage without sexual reproduction scrambling his perfect DNA?
The resolution to that problem lies in what the author calls the two victories of the living codex architecture. To understand the endgame, we have to clearly separate the biological mechanism from the spiritual climax.
Yep.
The first victory is the genetic preparation we've been discussing for the last hour. That preparation overcomes inherited biological corruption. It gathers the historical line, excludes the flaws, and creates a perfectly coordinated genome capable of ideal repair, flawless immunity, and biological longevity.
But the author makes a brilliant point here. Biological perfection isn't enough to solve the ultimate problem of the universe.
No.
Because even if you have a perfectly healthy, genetically flawless human body with an unblemished immune system, that body can still be destroyed by external physical forces. It can be crushed by a falling rock, it can be scarves of oxygen, or in the historical case of Jesus, it can be nailed to a Roman cross and exsanguinated.
Precisely.
Oh.
A perfect genome does not grant you magical immortality against severe physical trauma. The prepared body, despite its genetic perfection, still belongs to the physical creation and is entirely subject to mortality. So the theology of the cross is not reduced to a mere exercise in genome engineering. The prepared body still had to enter mortality, physically bear the accumulated, violent consequence of the old corrupted line, and actually confront the grave.
Which brings us to the second ultimate victory, the resurrection.
Yes.
If the genetic preparation overcomes inherited biological corruption, the resurrection overcomes death's jurisdiction entirely.
The genetic preparation addresses the deep-time corruption of the past. The resurrection secures the absolute incorruptibility of the future. The author uses the word crossing in multiple senses to join these ideas.
How so?
Well, in genetics, a germline crossing recombines inheritance to create something new. In theology, a covenant crossing moves a people from the old order to the new. And historically, the cross itself is the brutal instrument that carries the prepared body through the threshold of death into permanent incorruption.
And it is only after the resurrection that the impossible F1 problem is finally solved. The second Adam, what the text calls Homo novus or Homo incorruptibilis, emerges from the tomb as the founder pattern for a completely new biological and spiritual epoch of humanity.
But he doesn't multiply his lineage through sperm and egg.
Because, as we established with the F1 problem, sexual reproduction would shatter the perfect genetic configuration through recombination.
Right.
Therefore, the risen root must multiply through an entirely different mechanism.
Yeah.
Incorporation and transformation.
Spiritual grafting.
Exactly. Think back to the agricultural metaphors we discussed with Jacob's flock and apply it to the New Testament analogy of the vine and the branches.
Yes.
The risen Christ is the living vine. He's the recurrent, perfected, incorruptible body. Believers are grafted into him. They are organically joined to Christ.
The Spirit multiplies the root not by generating billions of new embryos through sexual reproduction, but by gathering many diverse members into one unified body.
It's beautiful.
The promise of the model is that the mortal, corrupted bodies of believers are eventually transformed and conformed to the exact pattern of the firstfruits.
So after all this complex math, genetics, and theology, what does this all mean for us? If you zoom all the way out on this massive synthesis, the ultimate takeaway is incredibly beautiful.
It really is.
It tells us that God does not waste history. The old, corrupted body of the first Adam, stretching back millions of years, isn't viewed as a failed, embarrassing experiment to be thrown in the cosmic trash.
Right, it's not abandoned.
It is gathered. Its entire deep-time history, with all its burdens, its suffering, and its hidden genetic treasures, is pulled forward. It is purified in one singular representative, carried through the agonizing bottleneck of death, and resurrected as a perfected, indestructible template.
And then, despite our own biological corruption, we are invited to be grafted directly into his perfect genetic and spiritual architecture.
The text summarizes this beautifully. The old body does not disappear into nihil. It is gathered and made new. Adam is not abandoned. Adam is recapitulated.
It is a vision of total cosmic renewal that fiercely honors the physical, biological reality of creation, rather than treating the human flesh as something dirty that we simply need to escape.
We have covered an astonishing amount of ground today. We journeyed from the deep-time Adamic clock operating millions of years ago, dividing planetary orbital metronomes by lunar cycles.
Yeah.
We walked through the stark, painful genetic risks of founder populations in homozygosity. We watched Jacob map the precedents of introgression and backcrossing with his ancient flocks.
We covered a lot.
We stepped into the conceptual Genesis chamber of the Incarnation, exploring epigenetics and imprinting to see how God prepared an unblemished human template. We visualized the physical signature of the central heterochromia, the eyes of fire. And finally, we witnessed how the unsolvable F1 problem of genetic dilution is overcome through resurrection and spiritual crafting.
It is a breathtaking, highly rigorous architectural model of reality. But before we sign off, I want to leave the listener with one final, deeply provocative thought from the broader source material to chew on.
Oh, please do.
We spend this entire time talking about how God prepared the second Adam by intelligently selecting specific biological traits from the human lineage. But the author suggests something even bigger, that the entire biosphere of Earth is actually a vast, distributed living codex full of divine biological operations waiting to be read by humanity.
The planetary donor treasury.
Yes. To illustrate this, the text highlights a real, peer-reviewed 2025 scientific experiment. Researchers discovered a specific strain of bacteria living in the gut of a Japanese tree frog, Euangella americana.
Oh.
When scientists took this frog bacteria and injected it into mice that had established aggressive colorectal cancer,
Wait, really?
it completely eradicated the tumors. And not only that, it activated the mice's immune system to permanently reject future cancers.
Which proves that the physical creation already contains the biological grammar to defeat things as horrific as cancer. The medicine was hiding in a tree frog. We just didn't know how to read the book until right now.
The healing operation is distributed in the wild, outside the human body, waiting to be found. And the author points out that right at this moment in history, artificial superintelligence and genome language models are learning to read and write biological DNA.
Wow.
We are literally taking digital AI data, feeding it into neural networks, and translating it into the quaternary chemical alphabet of A, C, G, and T to synthesize viable genetic material.
Which raises an incredible, almost unsettling question for you to ponder as you go about your week. As we build AI systems that can read the vast terrestrial inheritance of the Earth, as we identify life-bearing operations like the tree frog bacteria, and as we learn to translate them into human-compatible genomes, well, are we currently, unknowingly, building the exact technological tools that will eventually help us understand the literal biological grammar God used to prepare the second Adam?
Are we, through our science and our artificial intelligence, finally beginning to read the native language of the maker?
Yeah.
It fundamentally changes how you look at a strand of DNA, doesn't it? It's not just blind chemistry. It is an incredibly ancient, deeply authored, highly intentional text.
It really is. Thank you for joining us on this massive deep dive. The next time you look at a complex strand of DNA in a textbook, or even just look closely at the intricate, beautiful color patterns in someone's eyes, I hope you see it in a completely new light.
Absolutely.
We didn't just inherit a smudged, fading photocopy of humanity. We are part of a deep-time lineage that was gathered, meticulously restored at the molecular level, and written onto an indestructible new canvas. Stay curious, everyone. We'll see you next time.